I think that was a splendid summary. I was going to make a few remarks. I'm not sure that I need to, given that what James has done before we open it up for comment. But perhaps I could just summarise a couple of things first before I ask if Gordon wants to speak, and others, I hope. That is, science advice is not easy, and we heard that yesterday from Mark and from Ian Chubb. And if I can combine their their cricketing metaphors, obviously what we're doing is playing a contact sport with a straight bat. I think we've heard more than I think has been in previous audiences about the different dimensions of informal and formal advice. Many of the previous iterations on this kind of topic have very much focused on the formal component and not the real politic that goes with informal advice. But at the same time, we've also seen about the other two dimensions that play into the role of any central advisory system, namely the promotion of evidence and the use of evidence and policy formation across government, which is clearly an issue that is part of the central process. And we've also heard eloquently from Mark yesterday about the role of the unique place of science in emergencies, where science advice becomes part of the actual decision-making process itself. Some of the issues that were left on the table or addressed, and it's not all easy, let's be honest, is the interface between science for policy or evidence informing policy formation and policy about the science system themselves. And we've seen that there are issues and opportunities there that are never completely separated, but of course it's a helpful heuristic in understanding what's going on. I think the debate about science and values, which particularly Heather Douglas has written so eloquently about, and if you haven't read a book, you must. It really is a very important book, is important because I think there's a confusion that is ongoing about how values and science interrelate. There's a set of values that are inherent in the science process and in the science decision-making process that's distinct from the set of issues of the values-laden domains that the evidence, that policy processes have to take into account, public opinion, political ideology, and so forth. And I think while we confuse those issues, we end up with a somewhat confused debate. Is that a fair way of putting it, Heather? Yeah, thank you. The other person who is in the room is Roger Pilker, and Roger's description of the honest broker, again, is a word that we have not parsed enough in this meeting. There's a lot of superficial regard to what Roger is saying, but and I think we could have spent a lot more time actually parsing out what that means, and Roger would be the first to say that it needs far more discussion. There's nuances to what that means. We've just heard, because James mentioned Sheila Jasnoff's writing, about the whole issue of quality control. And of course, that whole issue of quality control over science advice, whatever it is, will be an ongoing issue for a number of reasons. Number one is one does need quality control. One does need protections and fences that maintain the integrity of the science that's put forward. But one needs to also recognise the various other dynamics in play with the other players in the system that mean that quality control will be expected, although how that's achieved will very much depend on the type of advice. The other thing we've heard about is that science advice is not the same skill set as science, is not the same skill set as lobbying. And I think how one treats those, particularly when there are organisations or roles that have, or persons that have multiple roles in the system, is something that needs further discussion. What can I say about Anne Glover's talk, other than to say it reminds us that science advice, however it's done, will fail if you don't have a linked up system, and the players both within the policy space come to appreciate the importance of the science advisory system, and the science community, on the other hand, comes to appreciate its importance. And I think every science advisor I've met has struggled with the challenge of linkages on both sides of the equation. I mentioned before scientific hubris, and I think that remains an issue in all of this. Science does not make policy. It never will. Science informs good policy making. Science informs the evaluation of policy. But I think there is a tension that scientific hubris often is the very reason why both the public and the policymaker reject the input of science. So again, and that plays totally into this issue that John Borrett and others have repeatedly made. The integrity of science, the trust of science, the behaviour of scientists, the consistency of playing with that straight bat is critical if science is to play a better role in dealing with the issues ahead. So I'm going to open up for discussion now. Again, just to build on what James has put up on his last slide, we seek feedback. Not necessarily today, if you don't want to do it today, but if over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks you could provide feedback, not on whether the food was any good or the cup of, there wasn't enough tea or coffee, but on the areas in particular which I'd like now to see fleshed out. What is it that we need to really keep on discussing? What can we learn from each other which needs a more in-depth discussion? What is it that would make a continued network valuable to you? Because I think it's that's really important. Just to add a couple of things, we already are in discussions with OECD through the Global Science Forum on terms of integrating the work they've been doing with the work that we're doing on an ongoing basis. The World Economic Forum is also interested in working with us to keep an ongoing relationship, as well as ICSU. So while there's lots of people out there in the space, this is the biggest group of real practitioners of the art of science advice. And it is an art, it's not a science, unfortunately, or fortunately. So with that, let's open it up for conversation.